Hello. Welcome to the Xirtus.
Excellent. So we're here with Miguel Connor, who is the author of The Occult Elvis, a book that's been making the rounds recently with all of our Syncad friends, and also the creator of the Aeon Byte. He does, Gnostic radio and a number of other things. Here's his YouTube channel as well. So many cool interviews you've done in the past. I've been pretty excited to have you on. Just want to ask you, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. It's hot where I am, heat wave like much of the country, but other than that, it's the same old simulation, man.
Where are you?
Northern Illinois, about 30 miles north of Chicago.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
So a bit humid as well. All right, fair enough.
Yeah. It's we're not used to it. Let's put it that way.
Well, so a big thing that you do with the Aeon Bytes, we'll get into the Elvis thing in a minute. I just want to ask you a bit about your whole approach to what you're doing. Like, what is Aeon Byte? What is Gnostic Radio about? What are you, give us a little pitch us your life, man. Because I've been listening for a while. I actually like a lot of the conversation you did. We were just talking earlier about the Jason Giorgiani stuff. I liked your Lon Milo. There's so many great. There's just some of the best conversations on YouTube. You can tell because you're kind of blacklisted that these are good things.
Yeah, the algorithm has never been kind to me, and I've had
it's a good sign.
I've been in many jails across the internet and many suspensions. It is what it is, but sometimes you're called, and for reasons that I can't even explain, a long time ago, through a series of visions instilled by ayahuasca, where I met this being called Abraxas, and other things, I became interested in Gnosticism. I've always been a seeker, or as I call it, a spiritual hitchhiker. I love all religions and cultures and mythologies and so forth, but Gnosticism I felt called to really not even embrace, but it was something that answered for me the big questions in life and sort of fit my worldview and expanded my worldview. And of course, all movements and traditions have holes in them. At one point, you have to deal with the mystery and the numinous. But it worked for me. And as they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's not sobriety unless you give it away. So I thought it's not Gnosis unless I give it away. So I felt I wanted to share this very niche and overlooked tradition, and that's what I keep doing, and I've been doing for a long time, really full-time since 2018. And I've been lucky to talk to amazing people, and the tradition keeps expanding, and I think in many ways Gnosticism is more relevant than ever. I mean, ideas like simulation and archons and our inner divine spark and all that. So I'm just called to do it, and it hasn't been easy. Like you guys and so many others, you always have to pay a price. The road is never easy, but at the end of the day, we got to do our our holy mission. We got to do what we're here to do.
You mentioned Alcoholics Anonymous. Last night I was thinking about the Serenity Prayer, and I was like, I think that it's almost a shame that what the Serenity Prayer is just gets associated with alcoholism, because I'm like, that's kind of like almost everything. It's like, what is your sphere of influence? Like having that perspective of like what I can actually change, and then like, because all the tension that we have around things that are completely outside of our control, and then we kind of preoccupy ourselves with that generally, when there's so much that we can control that we don't admit that we can control and take responsibility for. And so I think Gnosticism probably kind of shares that with like existentialism, where it's like, what is your role in all of this and your own abilities, and kind of like letting go of what might actually be outside of your influence and accepting that.
I think that's a very astutely said, because yes, some scholars have said that the Gnostics were perhaps one of history's first existentialists, kind of Christianist, maybe Christian, as I often joke that if you want to learn about Gnosticism, listen to Johnny Cash while reading Kierkegaard, and you'll get some of the Gnostic essence or vibe. And because again, with the Gnostics, yes, we are somehow thrown into this world. We don't know why. There's been some sort of memory wipe, and suddenly we've been formed into this sort of fake self, and we got to find out what our true selves and what is the nature of this world. And we sort of go through. And on Alcoholics Anonymous, what I love about Gnosticism, it's much more encompassing than people would know, and certainly many people despise Gnosticism. It's always been the big boogeyman throughout history. Even today, people like James Lindsay and others, and Baptist pastors are still bitching about the Gnostics and what an existential threat they are. But did you know that the Alcoholics Anonymous, the first, I think, step 2 and 3 is actually influenced by Carl Jung, who himself, his depth psychology ideas was directly influenced by Gnosticism. When he learned about Gnosticism, he said, these people have the secrets of the psyche, and these are some friends, long lost friends. And a lot of his ideas, and you can see that in the Red Book and other, are extremely Gnostic. He worked with Sophia and the Demiurge, and ideas like archetypes and the shadow are definitely influenced by Gnosticism. But towards the end of his life, Bill W., the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, sent him a letter saying, your ideas inspired step 2 and 3. And Jung was very, he was very grateful, and they discussed about the ideas about evil and all that. So even in AA, you have a little Gnosticism installed there.
Sure. Wasn't he, the man you're talking about, wasn't he very like open to the use of psychedelics for treatment of addiction? And that like, I remember I saw this video of like this housewife under the influence of LSD that's like from the 50s, and it's like it's really a fun video. I'm sure a lot of viewers have seen it, but like I didn't know that the person who you're not looking at, who you can hear the voice of, that's actually the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous.
He did try LSD therapy, and I wish he'd continue, Bill W. But at the time when he started trying it, suddenly the government was against it. It became considered a street drug. You know what I mean? It quickly became vilified, so he stopped. But it's a
they
bit,
were
I do
trying
think,
to see if they could use it as a truth serum or something. What can we use it for? We gave it to soldiers thinking maybe we can get a Jacob's ladder effect over here, but they were just climbing trees. They weren't interested in fighting. And then they're like, oh, well, let's get the public on this, make them docile. And then we're like, oh, shoot, we have people like Abby Hoffman, and it kind of backfired. Like I personally consider Abby Hoffman like a genuine variable in the system. Like there's a lot of psyops out there. If he did have psyops, they're like the good kind. You know what I mean? Like encircling the Pentagon, putting the flowers in the barrel of the gun. There's something organic about that, even though it's organized. But he was a real threat, and so they had to it backfired. They were like, oh, this will be perfect for the public. They hadn't really thought about revolutionaries on LSD. Like that wasn't something they'd really considered too deeply, I think. So
I think Hoffman tried to elevate the Pentagon with telepathy with a group and all that. There were some crazy times, and unfortunately,
I mean, didn't it kind of work in a weird way? Like I feel like the Abby Hoffman levitation thing wasn't necessarily designed to actually lift the Pentagon, and maybe it was, but they stopped it from getting that far anyway. But they definitely changed the game, and they changed the way that it was being played by a long shot. People looked at the idea of violent. I mean, because right before that's the Chicago, Illinois, the riot. What's it called? Where they beat up a bunch of kids. Abby Hoffman had all those kids at the
Chicago?
sort of
You're talking about the DNC? In what year was that?
68, I think. 60, right? They beat up. They had all these cops beating these kids, and that showed like, what are you doing? These are kids. These are the white middle class, upper middle class children that these taxpayers paid to go to these colleges for. And so it really kind of changed the game, because they said, look, this is guerrilla theater. These are artists. These are not the violent radicals that you can pretend they are. In the 50s, you could do that. You could say all these communists are a threat to America because they didn't really understand. They had the propaganda wing. But once you start to see these are just these kind of dumb kids in college, it changed the way that they fought the war. When you start putting flowers in the gun, I think it kind of, the visual shifted in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but it really amounted to nothing. I mean, the 60s didn't do much. That's my attitude. And it soured real quick. It got really dark. So I'm working on the sequel to the Elvis book, the David Bowie book, Elvis 2.0.
Oh,
And I
nice.
show how the 60s just soured and turned very dark with the Manson murders, the Altamont Festival, the deaths of all these luminaries like Jim Morrison and so forth. And it just went south, and it was actually I think we're getting ahead, but it was glam rock and punk that really revitalized, because the idea of flower to the people and marching wasn't working. You had to get down to Elvis basics and put some really hard music to really wake people up and get people.
But isn't this a great segue into Gnosticism? Because I agree with you. And couldn't it be said, like, there's something about the duplicity? So, like, not to just jump around and do a lot of name dropping, but like, I talk a lot about Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, like, which is his first book written in his 20s, whatever. It's like this idea that for every Dionysian movement, there's a equal, like, correspondent Apollonian reaction, or vice versa, where there's the structure and the law and all of this, and then one goes this way and then the other one goes that way. And like, you talking about Altamont, like Altamont would be like the lunar festival to the solar festival that was Woodstock. Like, it is impressive that many people got together for Woodstock and there really was no violence, and like that idea of like, and that was supposed to be like the biggest gathering that had happened up to that point, and it's not, like, there's something to be said for, you could just as easily look at the negative, or I hate to even put this in terms of negative and positive, but you could look at like the freedom side and then the restrictive side, and the way that they kind of fluctuate and kind of ultimately balance each other out,
Yeah, but Altamont was a satanic ritual. I mean, there was nothing, good or anything. It was the Rolling Stones, Satanists. It was a ritual with the Hell's Angel to sacrifice,
Well, I got a friend who went to Altamont, and he had a great time, although he's passed away now. But and I said, "How did you have a great time at Altamont?" He's like, "Well, I was in the back." He was like,
But they were using your egregore, your energy. I mean, you need the crowd to create the egregore. And George Lucas is filming. It was just even. I mean, Don McLean in his song American Pie a few years later describes it as a satanic ritual.
Thank you. So, you know what?
That's a culmination of the 60s, and Charles Manson is the culmination of the hippie movement. And I want to be honest about Gnosticism. His religion is very Gnostic. When I read his stuff, I'm like, oh my God, he's Abraxas, and but
how much of the narrative about Charles Manson do we accept to be the truth? I mean, this is the thing with most of these narratives. The same thing with the hippie movement. Remember I was watching recently the magic trip footage around Ken Kesey and the electric Kool-Aid acid test. You can see at the time they kind of knew that they were on this MK Ultra tag and release program, where the Veterans Hospital has this ventriloquist Olympic acrobat, and he's supposed to be followed across the country. I mean, in the book, you got to get to the point of realizing that the band, the Warlocks, become the Grateful Dead. Who are warlocks? What does it mean to be a warlock? It's more than a sorcerer or a wizard. It's the betrayer of the secrets of the coven. Earlier, someone was asking us if something was a Freemasonic thing, and I mean AA being a Freemasonic type of thing, which I wouldn't really push, but I would push the idea that the warlocks are open sourcing, or they were betraying the secrets that at that time were really famous secrets, the desert rats, kind of, that everyone in America were part, in most of them in the 50s were part of some sort of a Freemasonic club. And that transition, sorry, go ahead.
Andreas, I think they may, I don't know, they could be referencing that you have the OTO and the AA. Like the AA is like anyone can join the AA. I forget what that abbreviates in Latin, but it's like the Thelema groups. That's like anyone can join the AA. You have to like actually go through the organization to be in the OTO. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, there you have it. Yeah. What do we have here? Yeah. But no, I don't
I'm trying to remember what is AA supposed to stand for again, right? Yeah.
Where is it? We should, oh, I think it's up there. Yeah.
You saw it somewhere?
I don't know. Should be. I feel dumb for not just knowing this, but oh well. I think
Argentium Astrum, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
Unless it's something else, Astron Argon.
That's it. No,
sure.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there could be a lot of connections there. I think that the pushing of the Grateful Dead is a pretty clear transmutation of the hippie movement, because they're telling the same thing with Timothy Leary, this tune out, kind of do nothing. How is it that the Grateful Dead, if there's some sort of radical band, is playing at all of these mainstream universities and colleges and completely socially acceptable? It seems like they're doing that. There was something on purpose about that, so that the hippie movement would be controllable. And it's, you know, you look at these kids, you have these military Kent State recruiters, and they're asking you to join the same way that the Freemasons were asking these kids to join. And the answer was becoming more commonly no, 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 until they realized, well, what we need to do is we need to market our group. We need to rebrand our group. We need to have something there to get these kids. And so if they're not going to join the normal military, then they need to join the Weather Underground. We need to create something there to recruit them into. And I feel like that, I don't know, I could be wrong, but I look at the 60s and I see that happening into the late 60s into the 70s, because the early 60s weren't like that. It wasn't really until 68 that this started happening. And you can see it. You can watch the Monkees' head and see how the entire culture, even for children, was being shifted and provoked and antagonized into that period.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, all of us have probably read Weird Tales from Laurel Canyon, and yes, it starts with the anti-war movement, and the war machine doesn't like it. It starts out with vets, Black Panthers, college professors, and then it's like,
and military brats.
Yeah, how are we going to poison the water? And some say, well, we'll introduce them to hippies. We'll destabilize it with bad actors. And we see it today at Twitter, right? There's anti-war, pro-UFO, anti-UFO. And we see the clowns and the trolls being injected in it to destabilize any sort of movement. So nothing is, same old, as they say.
I mean, you know, the whole thing with Jim, sorry, I was going to say Jim Morrison with his father in the Vietnam War, and that entire connection. He was originally trying to sell Nietzsche. Like, he really wanted to have a Nietzsche encyclopedia set and to figure out how he could make an art project that taught young kids about Nietzsche, right? And from the perspective of the praxis, because you're doing the nihilist deconstruction of our society with these kids who don't even know any of the things that they're supposed to be taught. Nietzsche was in a generation of people that were in a zeitgeist of these ideas. Now you've got these kids who know nothing about it. They were raised on Kentucky Fried Movie, right? So you could completely control.
That's an odd movie to bring up. God.
Val Kilmer, right? It's because of Jim Morrison, Val Kilmer.
Oh, yeah. I was going, wow. Of all the movies he could have brought up.
Oh, no, I'm thinking of Top Secret. I'm thinking of the other one.
Kentucky Fried Movies even before.
Yeah, but it's the first movie, I think, about the television generation, like children raised on television instead of on books or raised outside, which is maybe reminiscent of our current generation, this generation raised on the internet and YouTube, right?
I'm down to get into some of the nitty gritty here. I've wanted to so badly just like take American Pie and go through the whole thing because I've seen like analysis of American Pie and I don't always completely agree with it. Like the flames grew high into the night, they lit the sacrificial light, talking about Altamont when they say no angel born in hell could break that Satan's spell. They were singing sympathy for the devil. You have that stabbing. You brought up the George Lucas thing. I got into a debate with a friend years ago who insisted that he got that shot, the stabbing shot, the money shot. And I was on the other side of the fence arguing, no. We would know that. That would be on Wikipedia. On Wikipedia, we'll say George Lucas was filming there, but it won't say he got the money shot. But my friend proved to me, my friend Jacob Berner proved to me with all the photographic evidence of George Lucas, where he was standing, that camera, so that he didn't take credit for it. This is pre-Star Wars. Like, this is pre-THX 1138.
No, that's
right?
how we got Star Wars, more or less.
It looks like that's like that. It does because it really feels like they wanted to kind of offset it's very similar to Helter Skelter. It's like almost an extension of it where you have this commune fear. Like there's communes that worked in their own, and the reason why certain communes worked, in my opinion, is because you could opt out, you could opt in, you could opt out. When you have communism where you don't, I say communism, but if you don't have a choice, it's so valuable in the first place. Like it's such a sensitive thing to try and create a system. But most real hippies, like the real hippie is somebody that was just like off grid, truly. Like they were like farmers, and there was an attitude about them. They were dirty, whatever. It was a big experiment. Sometimes people went overboard. They're like, let's just sleep all in the same bed. Like, what could go wrong? And it's like, you know what? Like, you guys, like, you're just rebelling against the 50s, and it's not. But there was instances that you can find where there's communes that really worked and should have been allowed to flourish. And then there's a lot of communes where, but everything got equated with the Manson thing. It became the grand excuse to just say, these are dangerous. We need to do something about this. Now we have like the preppers are treated in a similar way. Some of the real preppers out there.
The Q people, yeah.
Oh, you're collecting your own rainwater. You can't do that. Like all of this stuff. It's like they basically the original real hippies, not the San Francisco people, not the city people, but the people who are out there trying to do their best to have a life for themselves the way we used to do, and they're happy doing that. Like, they like that it could, I don't know, I see different like alternative timelines. Like, did it have to go this way? But the thing about American Pie is that more than anything, as far as I can tell, it's about the British invasion. Because if you go through step by step when it's saying the day the music died, it's describing this movement that was happening in the United States, that there was a spirit to, that there was that, but Bob Dylan was kind of
always Jesus Christ being crucified in the narrative, right?
He's taking the place of Elvis, right? That's the coat he borrowed from James Dean, and he's out there kind of doing this Pied Piper thing. But they're like, we had some movement, and then they describe the marching band refused to yield. The players tried to take the field. The marching band refused to yield. Who's the marching band? It's clearly the Beatles. We try, and so to me, I'm like, the White Album, it ends with a lullaby. Like, it's like at the height of what's supposed to be this American movement. It's like, everybody go to sleep. Like, like it feels that way to me. It's like, it's so weird. Like, if you look at that signed copy of the White Album with the Manson family and Charlie signed in the middle, if you look at what it says, like, I don't know, that must be very valuable now, but it says last words dash no. And you're like, is it the last? Oh, I think it's even last word. So it's like, is he talking about Sharon? Say, like, what was the last word? Or is it about the White Album? Like, he's signing the White Album. And to me, it's like he has his own White Album. That's kind of what Lie was. You know what I mean? Like, it's like he was like he's like, speaking of opposites, it's like they were the most produced, the most put on a pedestal thing, like the Beatles, and then who the frick is Charlie, like, and his people, like, they're the lowest of the bottom of the barrel, right? So it's like there's like this perfect kind of Abraxian like dichotomy happening between what they represent culturally,
And the death of 50s music, like the monotones. Did you write the Book of Love? Right, the Book of Love being the monotone song, and there's a lot. Sure. There's a. I feel like that's one of the best ones too, because it's very Gnostic and it's presentation because Don McLean just said, "Oh, it's just a song about nothing." Like he refused to ever explain.
It's about hijacking a movement. Is to me what it's about. And like that is like there's examples of that we find all through like every time that there's an integrity to any kind of movement, some integrity, you see that people want to use that and redirect it to whatever nefarious ends they have in mind. And so when I look at like that book that you're describing about Laurel Canyon, like gone into that many times like over the years, and I just can't help but feel like of course, like their military families, their kids will rebel, there's weird stuff, man. You're bringing up Jim's dad was in the Gulf of Tonkin refusing to follow orders at a certain point because he recognized a false flag as a false flag, and supposedly the story goes that they threatened his son. They're like, we know who your son is, who knows the full story there, like, I mean,
Marty Robbins, a pink carnation in a pickup truck.
Totally. Yeah, they found Jim in a bathroom stall in a club, and people, and like the club owner was like, he was like in his 90s or something. He was like dying. He like told this whole story about how he agreed, he didn't want the bad publicity for his club in France, so they like took him and brought him in a van to the hotel and said, yeah, he died in the bathtub, which itself was kind of symbolic of that old painting, with the guy dead in the bathtub. Like, it's weird, man.
I would disagree. I would say that the jester in American Pie is Elvis. So,
I thought that the Bob Dylan singing to the king, and the king is Elvis. Is that?
I don't see Elvis as Elvis is definitely the jester. In my book,
I thought that was the joke, is that it's both. It's like there's an archetype of the jester, and it was Elvis, and then Bob Dylan is like becomes the parody of the jester archetype that was Elvis. Like he's not really the thing, but he's wearing the coat of James Dean, and he's kind of like playing the part of the same archetype. That's how I took it. But yeah.
But Miguel, explain from your perspective, Elvis as the jester, right?
Well, I mean, in my book, of course, I equate him with the trickster archetype, and that's always a figure that's there whenever there's a changing of the world, which Elvis was part of, and a changing of the culture. Obviously, James Dean, Elvis was a big James Dean fanatic and sort of took a lot of his vibe for himself. So, and there's other parts too, but I mean, the Bob Dylan argument I can see, but I lean towards Elvis, and of course, yeah, you're talking about Abraxas, of course. What's the name? The Beach Boy who died, Wilson, recently.
Brian Wilson just died. Yeah,
yeah. That's another one other than Nietzsche we have to look at, is that Hermann Hesse was huge in Southern California at the time, and Hermann Hesse again was a patient of Jung, learned a lot of Jungian ideas about Abraxas and Gnosticism from Jung, and then the Beach Boys and Manson learned a lot from Hermann Hesse, including the worship of Abraxas. Charles Manson said his god was Abraxas, and it was definitely a big influence back then. So it's but I know that at the end of the day, people like John Lennon and Elvis completely denounced the 60s movement, said right. It failed in every possible way. And proof is in the pudding, right?
Do you look at Elvis as being, and we can go a little deeper into this as well, just the idea of Elvis. What is the praxis of Elvis to you? I mean, is he a Gnostic, or is he kind of like a Vedic wizard, or what is exactly Elvis's manifestation?
Well, I call him America's shaman. He is the shaman of the American soul, and that was his job. Because one of the issues that we have to realign our thinking is that rock music was never meant to be a form of entertainment. It really was a form of American shamanism that fused African animism. It fused Pentecostal ecstatic movement, which kind of taps into the ancient mystery religion. It infused all these forms of spirituality, and these guys knew this, whether it was Little Richard, Johnny Cash, Elvis. They were bringing all these forms of religion and bringing it out. In fact, when people used to go to rock concerts in the early 50s or the 50s, they used to say this is like a Holy Ghost tent revival, except they've injected this drugless bacchanalia into it. And even then, it's not there. I mean, the Pentecostals were really disliked by other Christianities, because they say they used to mix Jesus and sex, because once the Holy Ghost got into you, you were hitting each other. In fact, whenever you were possessed in Pentecostal and started dancing and talking in tongues, it used to be called rock and rolling in the 40s.
Yeah.
So once we realize it is a form, it is a sound modality, a therapy that came during this transition period after World War II and the Great Depression, when this gigantic military sci-fi empire that the world had never seen called America came out, and rock music was sort of the balm, the salve to help an entire generation deal with this new identity, this new brave new world. And it was the spirituality, the true spirituality or shamanism of the American people. And it came, and Elvis was the one that led the American people through it. That's what a shaman does, right? It takes care. It's a spiritual troubleshooter of the tribe. It goes into the spiritual world for cures for the tribe. Shamans always use a lot of theatrics and music, and they look more like Elton John than wise gurus.
Right.
And that's their job, to lead people through the change in history. The trickster does the same. The trickster, the jester, is always at the crossroads, the liminal places where we are, and it helps people go through the transitioning of an age, whether they like it or not. You see that in Native American lore. The changer, the coyote, he comes and he says, the world is changing and things are going to be different, but let me lead you. If not, you'll be left behind. And that was certainly exemplified with Elvis. And I go in big detail in the book. I bring in Joseph Campbell and Jung and Mircea Eliade and all these guys to show that Elvis is the trickster. He is America's shaman. And he continues to be so. Especially, I say, we need him more than ever as we are transitioning to a different identity as a country. And on the other side, you go with the trickster, you go with Hermes. Hermes is the god of the doorways. He will lead the way or lead you astray, and that's it. So,
what I found interesting. Go ahead. Sure.
Sorry, no, you go ahead.
Just really quickly, because one of the funny things is, before your book, one of the major sources who would have agreed with you that Elvis is this magical trickster were these, terrified Pentecostal Christians. And I mean, I've seen more videos about the magic of Elvis from someone saying that rock and roll is Satanism, someone like Baptist from Tennessee or something from the 90s. That, I mean, they're constantly trying to point it out. And I don't necessarily think they're entirely, I wouldn't say wrong about his magic aspect. I think there's a venue here where we agree that there's something very magical about Elvis, that all of his shows are manifesting something great, that the Beatles are picking up on for this. They're getting women's energy, these young virgins, to scream in this sort of magical passion for this person. And people saying they saw Elvis part clouds and that he had all these. What do you think about, in terms of Elvis? How far would you go to say that you thought Elvis had some magical powers,
Well, in the book, I show that he had a lot of magical powers. As I call him from the Heart Song, he's the magic man. And again, in my book, we all know that there's a whole tabloid YouTube conspiracy industry with Elvis. He was he was one of the great conspiracy theories, and it still continues today. But I go to lauded mainstream biographies. I go to people that knew Elvis. Some of them were secular. And in all the instances, I make sure that there was always many witnesses seeing him do his magical or supernatural abilities to show. You can find this stuff in Priscilla Presley books and Memphis Mafia books and spiritual teachers. So yes, he could manipulate the weather. He would do that for friends. He did that for Ginger Alden, his fiancée before he passed, and they were in Hawaii. And he says, "Look," and he shows Ginger and some girlfriends and his bodyguards. He waves at the clouds and they part. Now you could say, well, this could be one of those tricks where he knew the wind was going, and you know what I mean? You could get away with that. But then he goes, they're all freaking out. Then he goes, well, let me show you this. And he does this, and the clouds come together against the wind. And you see that. You see him stopping rain, making objects move, healing heart attacks and broken legs. I mean, all the time Elvis was doing these incredible feats that would be, superior than most magicians you would know about in modernity. He was
Well, that's
just
a Wilhelm Reich kind of thing, right? The cloud busting or whatever, But in your book, you probably mentioned his book list that we know of. Like, so it used to be on like the Nashville like Elvis Museum website that they actually just had the list, and you can still find it pretty easily online. But they used to, like, I think at a certain point they were like, maybe we shouldn't be having, because of maybe association with theosophy to Nazism and stuff, and they're just like, it's not a good look or whatever. But Elvis's library is phenomenal. And I'm a big enthusiast for the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Like, he wasn't just studying yoga like in a superficial way. If you look at what he was looking at, he was like the good stuff, like real, like he had a certain standard when it came to occultism. He had a certain standard when it came to Eastern philosophy, and you can see that just even like just his book list. Like, he had a lot of Manly P. Hall. I believe he had the Secret Teachings of All Ages. Like, he's very learned. And so if you look at that Sofia Coppola film, which is funny, it came out not that distant from the other Elvis film. Like, there's a big Elvis film, and then there's Sofia Coppola's like Priscilla film. And it's not flattering of Elvis. It's really like, it's kind of a hit piece, right? But the thing is that their portrayal of Elvis in Sofia Coppola's film, like, I have a lot of problems with it, and I have to kind of like be like, okay, I have to remain objective. I shouldn't be taking offense. How true is all of this stuff? There's parts of it that totally check out, and you can't deny. You're like, ooh, that's rough, dude. Like, and then at the same time, you can see that there is an inherent bias. And there's a very definite position that she's taking in relationship to who Elvis was. Her treatment of how he was with yoga and philosophy reminds me of kind of what Oliver Stone did with The Doors. Like, I think Val Kilmer did one of the best performances ever portraying anybody. Like, his portrayal of Jim Morrison was spot on. The writing and the way that they treated like his interest in Nietzsche and all this stuff was so mediocre and so ridiculous compared to what it actually was. And all the members of The Doors would emphasize that this isn't it. This is a mythological kind of representation of it. I think Sofia Coppola kind of did the same thing with her Priscilla film, in the sense that she took certain liberties for the theatrical portrayal that she wanted to go with. So you can see these kind of like, for the sake of this story that I'm telling, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the thing in itself, and trying to be as accurate as she can be, which is funny because you could say the same thing for that other Elvis film that came out around the same time, which is just, doing him up in this continuation of this portrayal that we're kind of used to, right? But just taking it another step forward. But I resonate with what you're describing. As in terms of, because it's also like, it's sex magic, right? Like, he was doing yogic practices, and like the way that they treat it in the film, this is another example of it, is like that he wasn't having sex for a long time because he was redistributing his energies, and he had this intention to do this whole thing, and they kind of treat it like, whatever, like, that's not healthy. I don't know, man. Like, was it working for him?
I was going to ask, do you go into that? Like, what I remember hearing this at the book he read, that he was reading on on the toilet, because they always say Elvis died on the toilet, but that he was doing Kundalini exercises while reading Betty Richards' Sex and Psychic Energy. Is that accurate, or is that not your
No,
book?
not on the toilet. No. He was reading a book on the Shroud of Turin, the scientific evidence for the face of Jesus. And some say that the toilet thing has a lot of holes because he had a barber chair that he had in his bathroom. That's where he liked to read, because the only time Elvis could be alone, he was never even alone in his own room, because he was a sleepwalker. If he was alone, he had to have a nurse come in and check on him every hour, because he almost died a few times sleepwalking. He was just walking off buildings. But some say no, he was actually in his barber chair, because the idea of his there are some witness accounts that say, his pants weren't down to his ankles, or actually folded somewhere else. But again, this is it's so hard. But yeah, the Priscilla movie certainly I think it gets right the 10 minutes that it shows Elvis spirituality, especially because it was a real threat. Because you're talking to a guy that was basically a industry in himself. I mean, he was feeding tens of thousands of people, bringing millions of dollars. I heard yesterday that Elvis made $50 million last year. He's not even around. So it was a threat because he almost quit twice the music industry during that time. Once to be a Christian monk, one to be a Hindu monk. And he was changing. He had no interest in Priscilla. The parties were over, the football games were over. It was all like, let's get a circle and meditate and talk about God. And wherever he went, even later on, he always had a group of workers bringing 200 books on the occult. And he, like you said, he was very big biographers, and people know him. He had a scholarly mind. He could, he wrote ideas and books, and he grasped these very deep metaphysical ideas, and it consumed him. So what the movie gets wrong, it wasn't just Colonel Parker calling and saying, hey, you got to get it. It was this concerted campaign to put a wedge between him and his spiritual teachers. Right. And if Elvis always had a weakness, Elvis did what Elvis wanted to do. It was just, he always got what he wanted, but if he had a weakness, he had this Southern honor. Well, if you told him you're not taking care of your family, he would but the Colonel used it against him. Everybody used it. So people were like, the spirituality, you're not taking care of Priscilla, you're not taking care of your family. And they used that, and eventually he walked away, but he went underground, because when you realize, it makes perfect sense. You've got rockabilly Elvis, army Elvis, movie star Elvis. Then suddenly he tells everybody, I'm quitting my spirituality and all that, but he wasn't. He was actually hiding the books in his Vegas suite or meditating alone. Right. And instead of driving people crazy, but suddenly he reinvents himself as this shaman magical being, which is the Vegas Elvis, starts out with thus spake the Zarathustra. He's got his Egyptian Ankh. He's got the Egyptian and Mayan motifs and all that. So you realize he simply transferred it to his music or his stage act, and really showed himself as this sort of sci-fi shamanistic figure.
When you just look at the numbers, like, this is one of those places where I can't quite tell if it's like synchronicity or just like total ritual death, that it's like 77, 42, really, like, you know what I mean? Like
42 is an Egyptian number. Yeah, very important. Memphis, what is Memphis?
Right.
The only Egyptian town in Tennessee, a state that's named after Civil War heroes and Native Americans. And Memphis in Egyptian means Antawi, the place between two lands, the crossroads. You see this crossroads Egyptian motif in Elvis all through the book and all through his life. I mean, all through the book. I show it in my book, but through his life. So as I argue, even his death was one long ritual. It was a funerary ritual, and I show how it was and all the symbolism and all that. And and he even predicted when he was going to die too. So
did he? Tell me about that.
He was dropping hints to people like his spiritual teacher Larry Geller and others, and doing and he changed his will. He was changing documentation, and it was freaking people out. It wasn't the usual rock star histrionics, or like, I'm gonna die. This was freaking people out. Or he would drive to Tupelo, Mississippi with a friend in the middle of the night and look for marbles under his old house. Just strange behavior. But 2 days before he died, he was sitting in his room in Graceland, and he called his stepbrother David Stanley. And David walks in, and there's Elvis with all these books on the occult. He's got glaucoma, so he can't read. His health is starting to fail. He's sweating and all that, but he was always reading, always studying, always practicing some yoga or meditation. And he says, David, I love you. I want to tell you that in 2 days I will be on a different plane. And his brother's like, yeah, in 2 days we got a plane to Portland. We can't miss it. And Elvis just rolls his eyes and says, give me a hug, and sends him away. And 2 days later, he was gone.
Hey, what do you think about the idea of like ritual suicide? Is that something that people have speculated on with Elvis, or is that just irrelevant to this because we know the forensics or something?
Ritual suicide. I haven't heard that. I mean, he knew that I argue in the book. I do, of course, have a chapter on conspiracies just to have one.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he knew that his karmic ride was over, that it was time for
You
him
think he
to level.
intuited that, and that this is just, because there's also something to be said for like that phenomenon of like when people say self-fulfilling prophecy, and you'll see things that come at people because of what they're putting out there, and how this relationship between, when it comes to this world, observer and observed, like line
Yeah.
between is like a line in the sand sometimes. And like, I don't know, like what you're describing, him kind of saying, I'll be on another plane and this and that. It's like he's intuiting something, but it's also like he's on a trip, like he's like projecting things out into this universe and what he gets back. So I don't know. It's like I recently watched I'm surprised it took me so long to watch this, but the Marilyn Monroe Maryland Declassified documentary, where they have really great interviews by the credentialed people that you would want to hear from. It doesn't paint a good picture for Robert Kennedy, that in all likelihood he was with her that day. And I like Robert Kennedy as far as politicians go. I think he was one of the best, but it's like, oh, was he with her that day, and what the particulars were? I highly recommend that checking out that documentary. Also, speaking of what we were speaking about before, to anyone who's never actually seen interviews with Charlie Manson, watch interviews with Charlie Manson. He'll come across like, so what is considered kind of like your average, right winger today or something. And in a lot of his ideology, it's like so normalized at this time, maybe even at the time somewhat, but it's like he's not. It's fascinating to see the media's portrayal of people, and not just the media, but just like the way that we have these taboos and all these ideas around people, and then you get to getting in touch with like any evidence you have to the reality of them, I think is really helpful. Like, talk about Elvis or Marilyn Monroe. These are people that have had such a dancing bear depiction that we've all kind of like inevitably ingested just by being a part of the culture we are. Like, the reality of who these people were is so far removed. Like, if you have access to any kind of direct link to who these people really are, like just objectively, like I could say some terrible things about Charlie just based on what I've objectively seen from the direct evidence, but at the same time, I think those girls did what they wanted to do. Excuse me. Like, maybe not the most popular opinion, but I think enough time has gone by, I can say that. And I think that Tex Watson was the real criminal of the bunch. I think he did what he wanted to do and oversaw what he wanted to do, and Charlie was kind of a piece of shit in a lot of ways. And at the same time, did he kill those people? No. He should have been able to defend himself in court, because isn't that the way things go? I would be interested. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that courtroom if he actually had gotten to defend himself. And, that would have been interesting. But they said his mind control powers were so strong they couldn't allow that. And I've sat through a murder trial. Like, I can not for myself, but I can tell you how theatrical they are. And what a lawyer is meant to be doing is so like that's their job. So I don't get that argument. But anyway, sorry, jumping around a bit tangential.
Yeah, I was like, what? We went back to Manson. Did you know that Elvis did go see the murders afterwards? He was
Really?
he went to the Tate, to the house, to what's his face? Yeah, to the place of the house, because he was obsessed with like any shaman. Birth and death were one of his fascination. He's the kind of guy, he loved going to graveyards to meditate. He would go to the morgue with Priscilla in the middle of the night and look at bodies, and he
Really?
knew the embalming techniques
Wow.
to a T. And
See,
anything
that's
with death,
interesting,
Elvis he loved crazy horror movies. I mean, it was that was his thing, and that's part of being again, as I argue, that's part of his shamanistic vibe life. And he wasn't afraid of dying, as I say in the book. He could astral travel, he could leave his body, again, like any shaman. He was always with one foot in the spirit world. I mean, that was his thing. There was one time he goes with Priscilla, and they come up to sadly a dead baby, and Priscilla starts crying, and Elvis says, you know, who knows why it was this time, and they kneel and they sit there and they pray and meditate to this child for like half an
Wow.
hour. So that
Yeah.
was a real life with Elvis.
It's interesting. We're coming up right now on the anniversary of his final show. In 2 days, right? Is the June 26th was the final Market Square Arena event when Elvis left the building, so to
Is
speak.
Yeah,
this
I
where
have a
he
whole
has
bunch
the
of
fake?
synchronicities of it. Yeah, there's a ton of synchronicities about his last show with the Colonel and his father, and the numerology. I've kind of forgotten about it, but I did write wrote some pages about it. So it.
Is that the show where he had also spake Zarathustra playing at the beginning of the performance, or was
He
that just
always
something he
started
did?
with that. He was
He always started with that.
he
Wow.
was very influenced by Stanley Kubrick, like David
Yeah.
Bowie. I mean, well, I don't want to go on a sidetrack, but
That's a good one, though.
Do
2001
it. That's what this show is.
2001, as I argue in the David Bowie book with the work of Steven Snyder, was never meant to be a sci-fi movie, just like rock was never meant to be an entertainment. I mean, Kubrick told what's the name of the author?
Arthur C.
C.
Clarke.
Clarke.
He told him this is a magical ritual, and he tweaked it to because he wanted this ritual of ascension that showed how all of us human beings could be divine, very Gnostic, very Neoplatonist.
Sure,
And
childhood's
Kubrick,
end, right? Yeah.
yeah, and Kubrick was very influenced by the mystery traditions, Neoplatonism, and all that. And needless to say, David Bowie's personality changed after he saw the movie. He did Space Oddity soon after that, and Elvis, of course, was a huge fan of the movie. Although his favorite movie was Dr. Strangelove, he used to tell people, you know, gentlemen, you can't fight here. This is the war room. It was like when he would go to the movie. Well, at Elvis, he would rent out the entire theater because he couldn't go anywhere public. He'd rent out the entire theater, and you ask people, you know, can you replay that? You know, gentlemen, you can't fight here. This is the war room. And Elvis was a big Trekkie too. He was a big geek, ufologist. He had three or four extraterrestrial experiences. I mean, he was way ahead of the curve and very sophisticated. Remember, in the early 60s, people thought the aliens were like green little men and combustion engine. Elvis was speculating, could they have telepathy? Could they be starseed? He read von Daniken's Chariot of the Gods, and he was like, maybe we are, the ancient astronaut theory is right. He was always very sophisticated. Like today, he'd be happier today on Twitter than he would be, you know, in the 60s when he kind of had to, you know, he couldn't talk. And again, all of his UFO experiences, there was always a crowd with him. He was never alone, you know.
Isn't there a story about the Pope at the time when 2001: A Space Odyssey came out? He saw it, like I think even at the Vatican, like they did a special viewing for the Pope to see 2001: A Space Odyssey, and at the end with the Star Child, he like apparently stood up and said, "This is the closest depiction I've ever seen of Gnosis."
Really?
Like that, yeah. There's a whole story there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which pope it was actually.
Maybe Paul. I think Paul VI was the Pope then.
Yeah, I think that's right. And he stood up at the Star Trials. Pope John Paul II might have commented that this was I think that's correct. I could be right. I'll have to look that up again. But that was a really interesting thing about the viewing of Kubrick's film. Another thing, of course, is September 11th, because September 11th, in a lot of ways, is we tried to do with it media-wise what the Aloha concert did. The Aloha concert was the single lens focus of billions of people around the world, all at this one monolith event, right? This monolithic event.
Yeah. America's Shaman, yeah.
I feel like, it's never, and yet September 11th even didn't have the singularity of viewing. It was as close as you could get, but still does not
more
replace...
people watched the Aloha special than the moon landing. It was
right. And then you have
anything. So, nothing has ever beat the Aloha event, which is also interesting because it's hello and goodbye from Hawaii. Aloha means hello and goodbye. So it's the Aloha event. It seems like it's one of the most magical
you say
things.
Goodbye, I say hello. uh
And
there
some people say that, I mean, of all the things that Elvis seeded, as I write in the book, the
yeah.
counterculture spirituality, because he's out there, talking to groupies and friends, and he's in Hollywood talking about Yogananda and Blavatsky and Manly P. Hall and all that. He seeded that. I mean, he was at Yogananda's ashram meditating years before George Harrison and all those cats showed up. But he seeded comic books because comic books were considered no better than porn. They weren't we're used to mainstream, but it was considered like, ugh, the lower case. And Elvis kind of kept saying Captain Marvel, Shazam. He made it cool. Martial arts. Martial art was considered a fringe outside thing. Elvis made it cool. Some say that even our love of Hawaii came from Elvis, because before Elvis shows up wearing the Hawaiian shirt, not even the Hawaiians wore Hawaiian shirt. He made Hawaii cool and like opened up their industry. So the guy was just trend setting and opening doors to what I say is the true American culture, our zeitgeist, our ethos, our soul. And it's very inclusive. It's very extroverted, but it's very spiritual, and it's very just out of control. It's something that only Elvis could do.
I feel pulled to mention to just stay on this point about 2001: A Space Odyssey. John Lennon was quoted as having said that 2001: A Space Odyssey should be shown every day in a cathedral, and actually donated money so that more people could watch 2001: A Space Odyssey for free, because he felt like it was important for as many people to see this as possible. Why? Because he kind of associated people seeing the film with the ape touching the monolith, right? So
Right.
developmentally, like, this is something people need to experience. Interestingly, the ape that played Moonwatcher in the film, the man in the ape suit was the director of photography for John Lennon's Imagine video. So take from that what you will.
And Lennon also had his own UFO experiences.
That's right, with the Dakota, at the Dakota. There's a whole story there. Do you know? I forget the particulars around that, but yeah.
Yeah, it passes me on. But again, as I'm doing, like, David Bowie had UFO experiences, Elvis. It's a small group. Chris Squire. You've got a few. Even I think Lisa Marie had one in Hawaii, but I just haven't gotten to research the details. So yeah, I mean, there's something again shamanistic about rock, but I think rock music is very sci-fi. I mean, it didn't develop until glam rock and David Bowie and T-Rex and all these guys, but it was always there when you think about it. Elvis came out of Sun Records, and the first big group was Bill Haley and the Comets. The first rock number one rock single was Rocket 88 by who is the guy? Tina Turner, Ike Turner. You know what I mean? It's starting to develop, but it really goes hogwire in the 70s. And somebody like David Bowie, he grabs onto the astronaut archetype, which is our modern version of the shaman. And in the 70s, the astronaut was more popular than any sports star, any musician. He was like the ultimate shaman, the explorer, the most admired figure. And again, David Bowie and others really exploited that or tapped into that.
There's a great article on the occult David Bowie, and I think it might even have Gnostic in the title, I forget, but somebody did this really great like expose going through David Bowie's kind of particulars throughout his career, where he incorporated specific things from occultism into his kind of tapestry of, because he would do these kind of archetype periods, right, where he's the thin white duke, and now and I mean, isn't that like Elvis did that? Of course, like it's almost like how you have like in the Buddha statues, where it's like there's the Siddhartha skinny meditating Buddha, and then there's like the image of the happy chubby Buddha with his arms in the air, and it's like, okay, so which era are we looking at? Are we looking at the peanut butter chocolate milkshake Elvis, or are we looking at the like he was just serving in the military Elvis? Like it's just there's different periods, but there are archetypes. They almost feel like different people, right? It's almost like he had like a different personalities over time. I mean, people just do that, but artistically you see it in like thematically in his whole presentation, on the stage, I mean, even Jim Morrison too, there's like I mean, he only lived to be what, 27, but there's like, you know, the earlier Jim Morrison is a world apart from the Jim Morrison that was in France. I think that a haircut really killed Jim Morrison, like, or because, you know, Jay Sebring was killed with the Manson family, right? Jim Morrison for years and years and years has only gotten his haircut from Jay Sebring. And then he was, you know, with Sharon Tate at the time of her murder, and like he could no longer get a haircut from his stylist. And it was shortly after that, not that long after that, that you saw that he got that botched haircut where they got it really short, and you know that he didn't want that. And like and all of a sudden it was like he just, like, from that point forward, he never cut his hair again for the rest of his life, and he just kept on growing it and growing it and growing it, and even a beard too. It was almost like, you know, it was connected to that. He said, he's quoted as having said, some of the worst decisions in my life were haircuts. And I always like thought about, like, I'm like, that reminds me of the fact that Jay Sebring did. There's a documentary
and Samson, right?
Totally, that's the thing too. So there's a documentary on Jay Sebring that came out of within the last few years or something. It's not that old. And there's close friends of Jay Sebring who were being informed live in this, at the time of their interviews in this documentary, what the actual police report said about his death, and like how it all happened, and like what his wounds were, like everything that took place. Like, the media had repeated over and over again, not just the media, like even the prosecutor, like with Helter Skelter, like there was a fictional story that was said about how he died that some of his closest friends didn't know until like a few years back when this documentary was filmed, how their close friend actually died. And like that speaks volumes to, like, you know, false media narratives. My God, his closest friends didn't know how he died until what, 40 freaking years later, whatever. It's like, it's crazy. Yeah.
Why do we keep going back to Manson?
I will do that.
We went from Bowie to Manson. I'm like, how do
I want to
to
cover like two more Elvis points, and then I wanted to get to Bowie actually, and then I actually want to talk about Abraxas, if that's cool anyway. So first off, I mean, well, I want to talk about the Elvis Nixon thing, but I first want to talk about the outfit. So you talk a bit about the outfit in the book. What do you think about this Kabbalistic Mayan calendar kind of, like, what's he doing? What's the magic outfit for?
Well, he was always fascinated with ancient Egypt and ancient Mayan culture. So that's just something he incorporated into his shows. And again, I think it was probably semi-conscious. I mean, again, it starts out with the Thus Spake Zarathustra. He's wearing his Egyptian ankh a lot, or a Jewish symbol of life. He was always wearing this. The day he died, he had it. And there are reports that he used to often just stop in between songs and do a Tibetan prayer. So, but Elvis was like Bowie. He was very eclectic. He trusted his gut, his soul. So sometimes he didn't even, it wasn't something that was, you know, completely conscious. He threw it together for his magical, and he had many suits. I've been to Graceland, and there's like, you know, dozens and dozens of these suits that he would wear. But again, it was all part of his sort of shamanistic vibe.
Hey, what do you think of the idea of a collective soul? Like, you know how, like, because it could go beyond just people sharing these things, like just in terms of like the creative inspiration, you know, like it almost feels like there's such a strong resonance between some of these players where you see like elements of synchronicity that, like, just probabilistically, like how did this align the way that it did? It almost feels like kind of like there's some shared specific intelligence entity, whatever you want to call it, that some of these players exude, that it's like, you know what I mean? Like it's almost like they like not just reincarnation or something, but I know the notions of souls kabbalistically isn't the way we generally relate to a soul. You can have like a soul can transmigrate, a soul can be you know, expressing itself in the physical world through multiple entities at once, you know, like what are your thoughts on that? Do you go into any ideas like that, more esoteric stuff like that in your book? Or
I do in the David Bowie book, which I'm working on right now. Yeah, and the Elvis one too. I mean, there's the idea of the collective unconscious, that wellspring of our history, our identity, and all that taps and the manifests. And then there's the idea of archetypes. As you said, archetypes aren't like Plato's idea, you know, ideas or something. They are dynamic forces that work through us, like you're talking about Elvis and Marilyn Monroe. They are the manifestations of the anima animus of the American soul or the American country, or you can say the king and queen. And some have said these forces, when they take over you, you become them, but eventually they destroy you because you are tapping into forces that are too much. With Elvis and Bowie, again, I go into the shaman and the trickster too. And you look at their lives, and there are very parallel lives to the T. I mean, they're both born on January 8th. Elvis releases Heartbreak Hotel, which is actually a song about suicide on January 10th when Bowie died. Both grew up poor. Both had abusive mothers. Both had siblings that were obsessed of because they lost them at a certain time. Both almost quit the music industry to be monks. Both, both had very similar eclectic styles of occultism and spirituality. And over, you really see the same character. Now, Bowie being Bowie, of course, he knew about Elvis, and of course, it was his idol. So he started, of course, borrowing, because Bowie was great at borrowing, or what did Bowie said? It's not stealing if I make it better. But his jumpsuits for Ziggy Stardust, his designer said, yep, we were trying to copy Elvis. When Bowie used to leave after his concert, he'd have his manager, Tony DeFries, go, Bowie has left the building. I mean, over and over, you see that how these two figures are connected. And Bowie also came during a time of transition of the world, especially in Europe, when Europe was going through a big change, and he was sort of the spiritual energy that helped heal and inspire so many people that were on the fringes and the outsider and all that. So both figures, and it's so funny because Bowie almost met Elvis, and he went to see him in 1972 when he was at Madison Square Garden. And I laugh because Elvis did 4 shows, and both Bowie and Trump went to those shows. And I don't know if it would be great if they're the same show, because you see 2 orange heads in the audience, like running around, whatever. I don't know if the same show, but Bowie showed up late, and there he is with his makeup and everything. And people in the United States are like, and Elvis got pissed off. He gave Bowie a dirty look and said, and Bowie felt ashamed his entire life. He said, here I am seeing my idol, and I screwed the pooch. But then he was going to meet him afterwards, and he kept saying, I want the king of rock and roll to meet the queen of rock and roll. And I want to look younger than Elvis. And it was really, but he didn't, because Elvis got busy. Although later on, I think Elvis wrote him a very nice note before one of his tours stationed that they said, good luck with your tour. Wow. Bowie kept it the rest of your life. And there are stories too, 2 amazing stories. Again, the connection of these figures is that Bowie wrote Golden Years for Elvis. Some stories say that Elvis rejected it. Others say that he gave it to Angela's wife because he was too nervous, and she got cold feet and never took it to Elvis. And this last story from Dwight Yoakam says that Bowie, he had lunch with Bowie, and he said, Elvis asked me to produce his new album in 1977. Now imagine this album would have been, but unfortunately Elvis left the cosmic building. But think of it, because one thing Bowie could do, I mean, what he did with Lou Reed and Iggy Pop, he could turn anybody or bring out the best in them. He was like the Steve Jobs of music. So it's a pity they never worked together, because again,
that period of Bowie is so weird, because that's when Bowie's dressing like an SS soldier, Zig Heiling out of a limousine, talking about Aleister Crowley, and The Man Who Fell to Earth comes out right before Elvis's death as well. What do you see about the magic? I mean, because I think a lot of people would look at Bowie as a magician. I think he kind of was presented even as a magician. But is there something darker there? Because you don't see the dark. I mean, Elvis is maybe magical to a point that's disconcerting to Christians, but it's not like Nazi Satanism, right? That was kind of the. What do you think about?
That was this thing. Well, how I couch it in the book, I give both in the Bowie and Elvis book, I give different theories. I don't, I want the reader
Sure.
because these are very complex mythological people. It's like Jesus or King Arthur. There's 1,000 ways to
Yeah.
approach them,
Yeah,
right?
just better recorded,
Yeah, we're never going to really know because we are projecting, and it's almost like reality changes with Bowie and Elvis. But the one that I like is the wounded healer, and I draw into Paul Levy's work on Wetiko and so forth. The idea that one of the characteristics across the world for a shaman is that they are broken. The whole MK Ultra children, if you break them, they go into the spirit world. And this happens in shamanism. They have a disability or a near-death experience, and they're like, you're the shaman, you have a connection to the spirit world, and that's their job. And both Elvis and Bowie, unfortunately, because of abuse, tragedy, poverty, and so much, they were shattered. And Bowie was probably schizophrenic. Elvis was also out of his mind, and unfortunately, his children, they were severely traumatized, and that gave him their superpower, because the wounded shaman heals other, not in spite of their wounds, but because of them. They have the avenue through pain, and they can connect and heal because of their pain. And a lot of wounded healers don't want to get better because they feel they'll lose their magic powers, their artistic bent, and they just keep us. So they don't heal themselves, and you find that in shamanism across the world. In fact, in some cultures, the shaman ends up being an overweight drug addict at the end of his life, because you're carrying the spiritual weight of the tribe. Sometimes you're carrying their sins, you're healing them. Some have called Jesus a wounded healer. And Elvis and Bowie have this same characteristics. Obviously, one didn't make it, but also, Bowie went to some dark places because eventually his trauma, his shadow, all that was too much, and it took over him and created the Thin White Duke, this guy who's into Nazi magic and Selima and all this. He was telling the press that England needed a ruler like Hitler, and just completely putting his foot in his mouth because he was coked up 24/7. He was doing magical practices. He got into a magical battle with Jimmy Page. He was out of control.
Well,
but
he
he was
deserves to win that battle. If you look up the improprieties of Bowie versus Jimmy Page, I'm rooting for Bowie. Sorry. I always wanted to really like Jimmy Page, but man, that guy was pretty valuable, by comparison.
Yeah.
It's like the worst thing you can see with Bowie is like, well, he was with a 15-year-old, and it's like, yeah, that, that was 1973, it was the style at the time, I guess, but it's like,
yeah,
Jimmy
but even
Page,
that,
it's like,
I don't know.
it's
if
like,
that holds
dude,
up.
Jimmy Page literally like had kidnapped this girl, basically, like, and kept her there for like the longest time, like super young. This whole thing, whatever she went through, getting passed around or whatever. I'm sorry, like I hate to crap on the heroes, man, but but Bowie doesn't compare to a lot of these people in terms of their hedonism, or whatever you want to call it. It's all relative.
Yeah, I don't know about. I don't know if that story. It's been looked into, and I don't think it flies.
The one with Jimmy Page with the girl?
No, that one. Yeah, no, I'm talking about David Bowie.
Oh, David Bowie. No, I just had to do a deep dive into this, like actually a few days ago, out of curiosity. I'm like looking into what were David Bowie's actual improprieties. He went through the Me Too thing, and he came out pretty unscathed. It's just it's relative. Everything he did that's on record, that's known as it stands, was like consensual, and nobody had any problems. For the most part.
Yeah, I know. So. He did have a essay assault charge on him in the 80s, but he settled out of court. But that's the problem with Bowie, is that he went through his Thin White Duke, dark occultist magician stage, and he got his act together for a moment, but he kept drinking in the 80s, and still he would toot some coke at parties.
He would say all of this himself.
So he was still out of control. And I remember he had this beautiful quote at the end of the 90s or late 80s and 90s during the Tin Machine era. A reporter said, "Hey, I heard you quit drinking." And he's like, "Yeah, I stopped drinking." He's going to AA meetings every day with his assistant, Coco Schwab, and said, "Well, why did you stop drinking?" And he said, I got tired of waking up every day and hating my life. This is in his 40s, rich, millionaire, conquered the world, and he realized I had hated my entire life. I hated who I was.
Who he became,
He hated himself, and finally in the 40s or in the late 80s, he said, I'm going to get my act together and be a good person. And he was. I mean, he lost a lot of his magic and power. Again, wounded healer.
Well, he had like that one 90s album that was just awful. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
Hours? Is that what that is? Oh, God. Sorry.
But he was happy. I think he realized I'm done being the wounded healer and shaman. I can't do it anymore. I'm just going to be a regular Joe, you know, which was David Bowie in the 90s, pretty much.
Right. You know, Station to Station, when he's asked about Station to Station, he dismisses it as that was my coke phase. I don't know what was going on there. And my feeling around that is it kind of reminds me of like what the Beatles did with Sgt. Pepper and what Rolling Stones did with their Her Majesty's Satanic Request, where they kind of just dismiss it as that was just our drug album. They don't have to talk about some of the particulars because it was just a drug album. Station to Station, one magical movement from Kether to Malkut. Never in the history of rock and roll has there ever been such a not even trying to thinly veil what we're talking about here. It is one of the most direct, specific, referential, Kabbalistic works of music that are out there. Like, that's the conversation I would love to have directly. From Bowie talking about what the stations are. The station is Malkut and Kether, and he's speaking to that lightning flash from the Sefer Yetzirah. Like, it's absolutely brilliant. He must have been high as hell on coke when he was doing that production, but just on a lyrical basis, that's the album that I would like to see discussed. And he never in his lifetime, as far as I know, discussed it directly, and he could write it off as, oh, that was just my drug phase. It almost feels like
he did admit it. He also talks about the white stain. Yeah, he did say later, I was in a period of Kabbalah and
but it's always so general. Like, know that he could have that conversation, and I'm sure he did in private with certain people. How couldn't he? You know, I mean, he was. My point is that we're talking about Elvis. We know how well studied Elvis was. These people didn't have, like, Elvis wasn't just like autobiography of a yogi and hippy dippy stuff. Like, he was deep in the all of these specifics. And like those conversations, that these people had them, but they never had them in a public forum in the levels. Like that's people in the comments here are talking about what it would be like if Elvis was on this show right now. Like, Elvis could hang. Like, he could, he would be like,
and they didn't have anybody to talk to. I think that's it, because even in the 90s, Bowie he was always influenced by Gnosticism through William Burroughs, Carl Jung, and the darker sides of Tibetan. There was all this Gnostic stuff, and of course he created his own Gnostic mythology, and then in Diamond Dogs and other albums. Right. But in the 90s, he really got serious, and he was reading Harold Bloom and Elaine Pagels. He was reading the Gnostic Gospels, and he would bring it up in interviews, but I'm sorry, the press, nobody wants to talk metaphysics or esoteric metaphysics, but he was like, oh, I believe in this God above God and this and that, and how this we could do. And of course, Modern Love has a lot of Gnostic themes, and I'm Afraid of Americans. So he was, and when Carl Jung's Red Book came out in 2009, he was first in line in New York at the bookstore. He was so happy. Same with Elvis. Elvis drove people crazy. And yes, I know I have handwriting where Elvis is quoting the Gospel of Thomas, and he's talking about the cosmic Christ. But again, both Elvis, when it comes down to it, most people in Hollywood, in the music industry and in the media, they're posers. They're not like us. So like you said, Elvis and Bowie would be so happy to be with us right now, because they could finally, that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to talk about the deeper questions in life. Why did I grow up in so much pain? What's the nature of God? That's what they really drove them.
The best conversations on occultism, are like where you don't have to walk people through all of the basics to get to the conversation that you want to have. No. So like, if if you're with somebody who's familiar with all the basics, then we can get somewhere and go to the next level. These musicians, when they're talking to the press or whoever, they're not even going to bother to go through, let me explain the basics to you, because they have kind of a limited time frame and a limited structure, and they don't get to really get at the nitty gritty, in their personal lives.
And
They
you've
talk
seen that
about
with
other
other mystical artists like Prince or the Beatles. They bring up Hinduism or conspiracies or UFO, and the press has no patience. The general public has no, and you can see they're frustrated. And Bowie's funny because he got kind of sick of it. So in the 90s and afterward, if a reporter would come to him and say, you want to do an interview with GQ or something? He's like, yeah, give me your birthday. He would look at their astrological chart, he'd draw the tarot, and that's how he decided what he was going to grant an interview. So he kind of turned the tables on the media.
What about the death of Bowie? I felt like that was similarly an expectation, right? He made several pieces of art. I lost my presentation here. He made several pieces of art right before he passed that were, hail to the prophet, right? These kind of pieces that talks about his death kind of coming. What do you think about that?
How do you know he's going to die? No,
well,
he did. No, he did. I'm giving you very good information, I've been told, but in the late 70s, while he was on tour, he went to a psychic. Again, Bowie was always like Elvis into this stuff. Unfortunately, the world had no patience for it. And he went to this renowned psychic. Again, he went with a friend who said this, and the psychic said, you're going to die by 69. That's how long you have to live. And Bowie was like, I guess that's it. And in my book, I do break down both Lazarus and Black Star. And there's there's Bowie being the Demiurge, because the Demiurge is the blind god. He's got the veil and all that. And I break down the entire video with the work of other really good researchers. And it is one giant Gnostic ritual, from Sophia to the Demiurge to Gnosis to all that. And he planned it that way because, again, he was very consciously influenced by Gnosticism towards the end of his life.
It syncs with Black Venus, by the way, which was kind of like an artsy softcore porno from like the 70s or maybe early 80s or something. But I have that on my website. It's pretty crazy. I always found
Saturn is a big thing, obviously, in both videos. Clearly. Saturn is sort of this dark god, and Bowie's almost admitting that he is Saturn. He realized even at the end of his life, he screwed up.
The cover of that album, though, with the star and how you could do an effect with the light. If you looked at it, if you looked at the album itself, like if you got them on vinyl or whatever, and the way that what was happening with that 5-pointed star, the 5-pointed star is association with Venus, because as the path of Venus, if you mark where it intersects with its own path as it moves through space, forms the pentagram, and it's always a symbol associated with Venus, to the point that, like, even if you watch or read the Da Vinci Code, and then it's like, he's like, oh, that's the pentagram isn't a satanic symbol, it's a symbol for Venus. It's like, well, can it be both? I don't know. But
hey, Noah jumped in. Noah, hey, which wanted you to actually, earlier we were going to ask you to ask some questions. Miguel, we were asking him all these questions about his Elvis book and David Bowie. Was there anything that you wanted to ask?
Oh, specifically?
Nothing about Manson, please.
Oh, come on, man.
Everything, all roads lead back to Charles Manson.
Shrek is about Manson, right? No, we're good.
Oh my God.
Well, I don't know what's been covered yet, but I do want to deep dive David Bowie's astrology too, because him and Elvis both were born on the same day. They share a son, and in the hexagram via Robin Armstrong's system of difficulty at the beginning, which I know is a thread that Miguel has really written about a lot, that ties them together, what they did out of meager beginnings.
I went through the parallels. I've got like 50 parallels in the Bowie book. I mean, again, it's almost like it's the same figure. It really is the same figure.
Any thoughts, Noah, on a relationship? But this is left field, so maybe nothing. But between Venus and Bowie and Elvis, what do you any thoughts?
I wish I was looking at his chart. I'm curious. Maybe they were. How many years apart were they born?
12, 40. Elvis 35, Bowie 47.
Huh.
So like 1.5 Venus cycles apart. So interesting.
Yeah. Isn't Venus there's like a Venus eclipse like twice every 100 years within 10 years of each other, something like that? Am I correct in that?
Like the moon eclipsing Venus, or what are you
No,
talking
the sun, Venus eclipsing the sun, I think happens twice every 100 years, and they're both like they're like 10 years apart when it happens.
about? Oh, interesting.
There's an idea that relate, like the King's Chamber, the Great Pyramid. There was that shaft, something to do with the sarcophagus and initiation rituals that would incorporate like that period. I don't know. I've seen some speculation around what that was about, but yeah, I don't know.
Interesting.
Whatever. I'll just put it out there.
Well, I got a message from Andreas saying if I had anything to ask about Gnosticism, which is kind of interesting because I've been thinking about it a lot, because I just went through like a celebration of life for one of my cousins who wound up being both the cause and cure of my own Gnosticism, or rather like malignant Gnosticism, because he was born with a degenerative muscular disease. And like in his chart, for how literal it was, he had Mars in Libra, where it's in detriment, in a day chart where Mars is more difficult, exactly conjunct Pluto in the 8th house. Like it just this wild, literal, degenerative muscular issue. And all he wanted to do was drive trucks. This guy just wanted to drive trucks. And it was like, well, what sort of God would give someone with such a unattainable life path? Why would, at the age when you're just about to get your license, you'd hit him with this? And it was like this bizarre. I've been wrestling with it my whole life, but then I look at what he did with his life. Like, he was a Leo sun. He was just this shining light. He had no sacred cows. He would make fun at a funeral. Like, there was just nothing was off the table. And he relentlessly was optimistic, like unbelievably. He just kept going forward as his body degenerated and doing more and more and making all these connections. And we go, and he's made all these friends who were so inspired by him. And it's like, no, like you can actually rise above everything, you know, no matter how dark the Demiurge's realm is, you know, the human will to rise above that is so profound. It's unreal. And just to really make it crazy, I'd contacted my grandmother who passed away, the matriarch of this, you know, and I got this strong message. It's like, I just want my grandkids to be together. And we'd let that really fall apart, right? So suddenly we're all together, and one of the cousins goes, "Oh, it's grandma's birthday today," which was the solstice. You know, it passed over into the sign of Cancer, which is the most family-oriented sign in the zodiac. It was like, oh, she did this, and she's laughing. You know, her and my cousin are up wherever they are right now, and she's tittering. She had this little tee-hee-hee. It was a profound experience. So you asked me about Gnosticism. I had to interrupt you guys to tell that story.
What do you think about like that? What's that? I'm sure you guys know all this stuff. I'm not so schooled in all the Gnostic stuff, but there's like the lion with the snake that's like the demi.
Right.
What's it called?
Yaldabaoth. It's in the title, right? Yaldabaoth. What do you think, Miguel? Tell us about Yaldabaoth. What do you think about that? Do you believe in that?
He's a bad hombre. He's a bad hombre. Yeah. He's
what do you think? What do you think of the idea of like this is just in my mind? I have these associations just on a straightforward level, like Elvis as like like resonating the lion, and then I'm thinking like, and then he has this whole Kundalini fixation, and then which is equated with the serpent, and I'm like thinking about how like Jim Morrison is like an extension, just like Bowie, and kind of like running with these kind of like this shared archetypal communication, and how like central the serpent was to Jim Morrison's whole trip. And it just, I mean, when I think about like Elvis, he feels very much like the lion mane, the pride, you know, all of like, I don't know, there's something. I
mean, he seemed like clearly into Kundalini and Gnosticism. So
he was, yeah. Here's a funny story. Yeah, I mean, obviously Jim Morrison and the Lizard King. Jim Morrison, who was his idol, Elvis. I mean, you start looking as what did John Lennon say? Before Elvis, there was nothing. And Bruce Springsteen said when Elvis came out, it felt like waking up. Bob Dylan said when I heard Elvis, it's like we were breaking out of jail. And so, and Morrison, of course, yeah, it was the crooners, but also Elvis that really influenced him. And
that his two main inspirations vocally were Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra. So you said it with the crooners, but yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you see that. I mean, Joey Ramone always said who exemplified punk, it was Elvis. I mean, the Clash, Strummer and those guys, it was Elvis. I mean, this again, it's the shamanistic, rebellious power that comes out, this counterculture that starts with rock and it's healing. Sometimes I think it was a counterbalance to Babylon and Hollywood. That's why we needed rock. And also the military industrial complex. But now I'm getting really tinfoil hat. But yeah, the serpent is there. But there's this famous story where Alice Cooper went to see Elvis, and he went to his suite in Vegas, and he's with some other people, and they go to the entrance, and this bodyguard checks him for weapons. Then they go in, but everybody has a weapon, and there's guns all over the tables and all that. And Alice Cooper's like, okay, because one thing about Elvis, 4 black belts, is he was always armed to the teeth. He got into the White House with guns. He got into the FBI building he flew with guns. He had to be with his guns. But Elvis suddenly shows up at this party, and he goes to Alice Cooper. Is like, hey man, are you that cat that does the snakes? And Alice Cooper is like, yes. And Elvis is like, damn, I wish I'd thought of that. So Elvis already had this snake thing. And of course, theologically, he knew about Kundalini and all that. But then Elvis gives him a gun, and he says, shoot me. Alice Cooper's like, what do I do now? The king of rock and roll? Do I shoot him? What does it mean? And suddenly he blacks out, and Cooper's on the ground, and Elvis is standing over him and said, yeah, this is how I disarm people with guns. And he brings him up, and then he said Elvis was just so gracious and kind, but I guess he had to kick his ass first. So when you read Elvis, he defies logic. Bowie too. It's like, you are not in the same mortal reality that we are. You're just not.
Somebody in the comments here, Witchmaster, says Elvis shot his TV. I feel like I've heard that.
He didn't like the singer or something, so he just shot his TV. Yeah,
he had a lot of TVs. I remember a wall of TVs at Graceland. I know you posted this earlier. If we live in a world created by a God that loves us, just imagine the world if God hated us, right? So, I mean, how do you, and from the Gnostic perspective, like, what do you think's going on with our world? Like, how do you look at what's happening in this illusion or this experience?
Well, it seems whoever's running this universe is not doing a great job. I think just common sense. I mean, who invented hunger? Who invented disease? And animals that can go up our urethra and lay eggs, or put insects in children's eyeballs. And as the Gnostic bishop said, the first sound of the universe was an om. It was munch. I mean, why aren't we breatharians or butthole sunners? Why do we have to eat each other and kill each other and all that? So there's something wrong with this world, as Morpheus says in the Matrix, like a splinter in your mind that's driving you mad. Now, having said that, it's not like the Gnostics were just pulling stuff out of their ass. They were philosophers, theologians, mystics. They dialed it up to 11, but they were looking at the other traditions, and we see the same thing. You go into Judaism, the Book of Enoch. These angels have invaded the world, and they're messing things around. They're looking at the Persian traditions and seeing Ahriman coming and always trying to mess things around with the way of the world. They're looking at the Sumerians and the Anunnaki, who are just kind of treating humans as slaves. They're looking at Greek mythology and saying, my God, Zeus told Prometheus to make humans just to be their slaves. They're looking at all these traditions, and you find this even in Mesoamerica, that some sort of intelligence or power came into this world and is controlling us. It's made us our slaves. It's
eating us.
And eating us sometimes, a lot of the times, and it's botched things up. Who is the CEO of this company? Is there, I want to speak to the manager. I'm like a cosmic Karen. I want to speak to the manager because things are not right. And this is found in so many of the great traditions. And the Gnostics just said, well, we're going to dial it up. It's not even that they came and invaded from another planet or they're fallen angels. No, these are the creators of the universe. This universe doesn't make sense. We've got to stop kidding ourselves. What are we going to do to fix it, or if there's any way to fix it? So that would be the Gnostic view.
Paul Levy, you brought up, is that the guy who did the Wetiko? How do you say it?
Wetiko, yeah.
Thank you. So he references the Kleepote a lot, and I talk about that a lot on this show, which is very relatable. When I think that there's some like this idea, like you brought up at the very beginning of this talk, the idea of you say replication, but you were referring to like the idea that we're in a simulation, and you were saying that the Gnostics kind of like, played with this, communicated this idea of the simulation. And so like, when you're describing the defect, like surely the defect with the universe isn't in the essence, it's in the shell, right? So that what the Wetiko idea is that there's some replication of what the actual intelligence is of nature, and that replication is deeply flawed, and yet it's like a kind of like worshiping a false idol when we mistake the replication or the simulation to be, as Kant would say, the thing in itself, right? And so yeah,
it's always seemed to me like whatever creative force really got things going was bored. And you can't have a good movie without conflict. Like it's always seemed to me the whole idea. And if we're all portions of God, which I think is true, we're all like fractal little pieces of the Godhead out here experiencing reality for it, that it's all about, can you transcend it? Can you allow all the misery and horrors and nuisances to wash past you and still come out? The more peace you find inwardly, the less the world does to you. I don't know if you guys noticed that. The more you get into a meditative state and gain peace. It's like the Chinese rainmaker. I don't know if you guys know that story.
Well, no, that's a good point. It's the Gnostic texts, and they had different speculations about how evil the archons were or how bad the universe was, but they're all uniform in their joy. That's what people miss. Yes, they're Lovecraftian. Yes, they're existentialist, but there's an amazing joy by those who have woken up and have Gnosis, because like you said, the power of the archons or fate or whatever no longer affects us. We've woken up, we've unleashed our divine spark, and they're writing these beautiful hymns to Sophia and how everything's going to be okay. As Tobias Churton said, people always think of the apocalypse, the literature, as negative, but no, it's very joyful, because when the divine shows you the entire architecture of the universe and the plan, you have a map to get out, and you really know that at the end of the day, the Demiurge and the archons, or whoever, they're going to lose. If you're awake, you are going to win. It's just right now we're kind of, like Churchill said, when you're in hell, keep going. You just gotta keep going.
Darkest before the dawn, right? So like, can you think of a better example of like a replication, like that's like would be kind of like this kind of demonic thing, more so than currency? Like, because we have a spiritual currency, right? That's like we're talking about the nadis or kundalini or whatever, we're relating to the chakras, that there's this natural kind of structure and intelligence, and then there's what we're imitating that with. So like, even if you look at like the origin of dollar from the German, and how, it would say NU21 with Jesus on the cross on one side and the serpent on the pole on the other. And even like the idea that the S and with the line through it for money is like derived from Numbers 21 of Moses putting the serpent on the pole, and you have the healing serpent as like the answer to the venomous serpent. Like Jesus himself, like the Mashiach in Hebrew, has the same gematria as Nachash, the serpent, right? The 358 Fibonacci equated with like this pattern that we see in nature and all this stuff. But the idea that like currency itself, we went from gold, right, as ascribing value to gold and silver, which had this ratio of value that related to the sun and the moon. And then you have like over time, relatively recently, I mean, Theosophy gets accused of having prior knowledge to this shift as it relates to like what was communicated in the Wizard of Oz, like how the movie came out coming out of the Depression. We go from gold to paper currency, and the idea of Emerald City is like kind of communicating we're trading our gold in for paper, and how do you get people to go along that with the fear involved, and like, and like, but now we're going to digital. Like, to me, it's like, it just looks like we've gone from something so dense having value to something paper thin, literally having value, to literally like something that is technically non-existent, like the digital realm. If Dala, that just inevitably evaporates into nothing, like, but we're treating it as though we're going to further solidity when we're actually going into the opposite. So like the thing is literally evaporating before our eyes, while we can like continually treat it like it has more and more significance, when in truth it has less and less. So kind of like God, you can't worship both God and mammon. Like, is there a better example of a replication of a spiritual principle than money, where you have this kind of illusion of like a currency that exists in nature, but this is nothing natural about it? You know what I mean? Like, it's a rigged system. And that to me like reminds me of like this communication of the archons, where you have this substitute reality that everyone's paying homage and treating like has a significance, when really the thing is just literally turning into nothing before our eyes, you know?
As above, so below, the good and the bad. But
Mhm.
as you're talking about Paul Levy, he says, yeah, Wetiko is the mind virus that replicates and creates more false realities to trap us. But Wetiko holds our damnation, but it also holds our salvation. The villains always monologue themselves and give away the game. And even Yaldabaoth is a supreme being, but he does hold part of divinity. He stole divinity for his power, so he has it. So they hold their own doom, and they also hold our salvation. And Jung would simply call it integrating your shadow, our personal shadow, our cosmic shadow, our national shadow. When you do that, then everything's great. The shadow no longer has power.
Well,
Right.
it's interesting how many of the ancient rites were all about banishing your own foul fate, right? Like the Orphic hymns basically all end in that. And even Christianity, right? And some of the Gnostic texts, being born again was about creating a new birth chart, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. People don't give Christianity a lot of love in certain circles, but one scholar said Christianity created the idea of free will. It really was not in the psyche of Western man. And, everything was fated or eternal recurrence. Even the gods had to accept their fate and be noble about it. Christianity said, no, 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 no. You can turn it all around and go to this different God or this different world and have freedom to choose. And the Gnostics were part of it. They said, because like you said, fate was considered a reality. The game is rigged, but it's not like you liked it. It's just, how do you break fate? You couldn't, but Christianity showed. I mean, even in Judaism, you're still under the thumb of Yahweh no matter what you do. But Christianity said there is a way out. There's like Captain Kirk. There is a way to rig the computer.
Yeah, which is another Gnostic feeling, the apocalypse of Adam and Eve, that we're escaping. We have to escape this sort of consumption by Hades. So I think that the idea, the Roman or the Greek belief that Saturn is consuming Jupiter and Jupiter escapes from the belly of Saturn, but on his way out, Saturn forces him to take a bite. Jupiter's forced to take a bite of his father. He gives him a taste for blood. And a taste for blood is something that then is why creation is constantly dying or being flowed through this river of Styx into the mouth of God, into the mouth of Hades that we're being consumed by. Do you push for Abraxas or Sophia right now? Should we go towards the wisdom or should we go towards abracadabra? What do you think? Abraxas, or where do you want to go?
Oh my God, I don't know. I'd probably try to stay away from Abraxas, if possible.
Yeah, you wanted to steer the conversation away from Charlie, which I don't blame.
Yeah, that was
Isn't
that was
kind
his
of the
God.
same idea?
Yeah, and even Jung, when he came out with his Red Book and his famous poem Seven Sermons of the Dead, again, Manson was certainly tapping into it. But it was assumed that Abraxas meant individuation, this God above God that could unite all the different opposite, which is important in Jungian depth psychology, which is individuation means we got to look at all our different polarities and put them together. But when you read at his Black Book, which came out a few years ago, he's like, no, Abraxas is not a good. You want to avoid Abraxas because he is the karmic force of the universe that binds everything together, but doesn't allow any freedom. So, but of course, the ancients had different views. I mean, he appears in the works of Basilides, he appears in gems, he appears in some Gnostic texts. So he's a very enigmatic deity. That's all I have to say. Yeah, we're talking about Santana, a Southern California rocker who was also into Hermann Hesse and so forth. So that's yeah, I think I'd rather stick with wisdom because we need wisdom. The ancients used to always talk about wisdom, senators and emperors. It was very important. Now you never hear any politician talk about how we need to be wiser because we're not. We need wisdom. No politician or spiritual leader invokes Sophia. I think we need to get back to that.
So how do you, yeah, maybe we should go, let's like elaborate more on wisdom. So what do you think wisdom as personified by Sophia represents really? Like what is that, what is that pursuit really? Because it seems
Well,
like it's absent, like you said, not just from politics, but from religion today as well.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, wisdom is accessing the deeper parts of our psyche. It's accessing the different capacities of our mind and bringing it together in a way that is positive for the human condition. I think in our natural state, humans are empathic. They lean on each other and they work together. That's our superpower. We don't have claws or 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 wings or all that. We work together when we are empathic and do things for a greater good or greater evolution. And that's really what Sophia represents. And remember, the Gnostics, again, they were just not making shit up. They were looking at the Jewish tradition of the Shekinah and the lost wisdom, which you find in the Old Testament, you find in Kabbalah. What does the book of Enoch said? Wisdom went down to the world and men rejected her, so now she hides in a cloud. They were looking at goddesses like Inanna and Ashira and others, these wisdom goddesses and fertility goddesses that had been suppressed by these solar cults, and it created these warlike civilizations, and saying, we need to get back to these powers. Yes, they are dangerous, they are chaos, but they are part of the human condition too. So I think that's what wisdom really represents, this divine feminine and sort of more holistic way of thinking that we've lost.
Do you think of a dynamic between Eris Discordianism and Sophia wisdom? Is there sort of a two-face
That's a
to
good
the
question.
divine feminine?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, because what did Steiner say? Wisdom is crystallized pain.
Oof.
To get to wisdom, any person who's wise has suffered more than we can imagine, has gone
You
through
say,
the
you're
gauntlet.
saying
So,
Rudolf Steiner? That's who you're referencing?
yeah,
What
that's
did
what he
what did
said.
he say about vaccines, and how is that relevant?
Yeah, we all know. Yeah,
Oh
he's
my
just kind
God,
of
yeah.
he's a prophet. He's very prescient about where we are. So yeah,
I find it
Steiner was a
interesting.
visionary.
I do love Steiner. We talked earlier last show about telepathy. Steiner's idea that we were originally a telepathic species that were overcome by a small group of wordsmiths, and that wordsmiths kind of can concoct spells with magic words that control us in so many ways. But how far do we go with this idea that wisdom is discord, or that Eris is Sophia, that there are two sides of the same coin? What is the discord, discordia of Eris and wisdom? How do you wrestle with Eris?
Well, I go back to the trickster archetype. If you look at the characteristics of a trickster, an outsider, a force that brings gifts that can harm us, usually hated by the other gods and so forth. It really falls with Sophia because she's always outside while the Demiurge is controlling the world. And her and Jesus have to like sneak into the universe and wake us up and plant the seeds and all that. So, and she often is in a lot of the text, she's almost like this. Kind of like Athena, she's more of a tactical, conniving figure that knows she doesn't belong into this world, but is trying to slowly penetrate it and bring her force here so that she can, awaken her children and go to the next step. So as a trickster, even with some warlike capabilities, I see it. Remember, Mars is the god of war, but Athena is the god of more tactical, guerrilla, strategic, let's make a
Battles.
deal. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too because Athena is kind of Jupiter's favorite and Mars is his least favorite. That's the one
Yeah.
he fears, right, to take him over. But I find it interesting too because in astrology you'd give wisdom to Jupiter. That's the planet that you'd look to for someone's wisdom. And if Jupiter has the taste for blood, it kind of leads you to like empathy is good. We need empathy, but you kind of also need a tyrant to keep things together in a way. Like you need a certain amount of someone being the leader and willing to hurt people's feelings to get anything done. If everyone's just worried about how everyone else is feeling, like if you don't have a leader in a situation, you can never plan the party, like it just.
Yeah, it's the idea of polar opposites, balancing these forces, whether it's Bina and Hakma or wisdom and reason. That's supposed to be the goal of all the psyche, the human soul, the human civilization. So when you have an unbalance, things go well. They don't go well, as we've seen with history.
Totally. I mean, those what you're describing is a continuum that we treat. It's a polarity that we treat as these are two isolated, separate sides, as though they're not the same thing. Which I think is kind of the takeaway of the significance of one of the big significances of Abraxas is this illusion of duality, right? Andreas, I sent you a message on X in the SYNCTANK group. I noticed you were sharing these images that you had made of Abraxas, and I was like, years ago, I had
I was
made
trying to
this
find it.
image.
There it is. I've been like,
And
I
yeah,
was
and so yeah, I was
really
like,
trying
oh,
to
I
find
know
it.
where you're getting that from. So it's like, yeah, so it's this idea of like, because you're talking about Sophia and the
Right.
feminine and kind of this, you know, it's a contrast that we project a duality on top of, right? So it's like, and this is kind of the mystery of the thing. It's that there's a reality that these are all connected, like nodes on a single branch, and yet we in our divisiveness and our ignorance, we treat it that there's just this absolute separation between these different aspects of ourselves, which, like you were bringing in Jung, kind of being inspired by Gnosticism and this notion of the need to integrate the shadow aspects of ourselves, and how we have this fragmentation that we just take as like, this is just the way things are, when really it's like a defect that we are generating and continually perpetuate, while nature itself is like transcendent of all of this. That's why truth will always win in the end, why it's darkest before the dawn, because the closer that we get to an illusion being dispelled, the more like the illusion like tries to like push its, you know, like front that it's just everything, you know, it gets angry, right? It doesn't want to be dispelled, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the videos that you did recently that I liked a lot, I mean, this is a bit ago now, but you know, you had the Jason Giorgiani conversation, and you know, a lot of things happened in this conversation. One of the things I liked was this out of time sort of singularity approaching thing. Do you feel like we're headed towards some sort of a culminating apex or singularity? Is that related to your gnosis, that we're escaping time, or is this just a perspective that you've heard?
Yeah, it's a perspective. I don't know. I mean, the way I see it, the universe will always be the universe, and they're in control, and our job is to wake up. God, if everything was perfect and harmony, our job is still to wake up. That's it, to individuate, to reach our potential, find out what our mission is. Yeah, we can speculate on archons and the simulation, but our job remains the same, and it will always remain the same. So yeah, I mean,
So you
doing the
don't think we're
podcast.
gonna? But if we get awake, will we escape? I mean, you say it's our
Well,
job
you
to
don't.
escape.
No, you don't, because the Gnostics, has been pointed out, were sort of they brought the idea of a simulation, which was very unpopular, Greco-Roman times, medieval times, you know, and they got
The
really
illusion.
suppressed, persecuted for it. In the East, it was fine. But they also brought the idea of a sort of a bodhisattva, because in the Gnostic
Mm-hmm.
tradition, regardless, you know, they believed in reincarnation. If you're awake, you probably don't want to melt into the pleroma or the divine consciousness, because your compassion has been ignited, so you want to stick around and help others. So they thought,
Isn't
so it's like, well, yeah, I could end the game, but you know, I got to help rescue other people.
isn't that kind of the crux of Plato's The Cave allegory, where it's like, okay, this guy has removed himself through all the atrophy and
Yeah,
everything that he's in, gets into the garden, so to speak, and then it becomes a question: do I just
he
like
could. Yeah.
experience this, or do I have to go back in there and try and communicate using the shadow language that everyone knows to try and tell them that there's something, you know? How do you motivate them when they're just in it? You know, it's that's the difficulty, right?
Yeah, the Plato's Cave, the Gnostics read it, the Republic, it was in the non-commodity library, and yeah, it's the original The Matrix, and that's the
Right.
whole, that's, you know, the That's what the philosopher and the mystic has to do.
Or George Lucas's THX 1138, which kind of feels
Very
like kind of
Gnostic
the most direct example I've seen on film of the cave allegory, because it's like literally a cave. It's the BART system while it was under development, you know, in Oakland and Berkeley and San Francisco, where it's just like, you know, but you're literally in a cave, right? And then it's like, what is going to motivate him to escape from this other than to see the dysfunction itself and reject it? Because he can't weigh that against the sun that he's never seen before. Like he has no conception of the reality of that. It's so far beyond anything that he has a point of reference for, yet he liberates himself anyway, right?
Very true, very true. Yeah, well said. I have to, guys, we're gonna have to wrap it up.
Yeah, we're at the end here. Actually, I was gonna just show them your links and everything, so we'll do the 2-hour thing here. Miguel Connor at Aeon Byte. You can find his link tree here and find a copy of his book. Sorry, that's the wrong link there. Get the Occult Elvis right here. Is there anything you want to?
This book is a real trip. Read it. Read it.
You read this book?
Yeah.
I haven't yet. I'm going to after this conversation for sure. This looks amazing.
Yeah, it's fascinating work here, and I really look forward to your sequel on David Bowie. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you want to make sure that we pull up? I also wanted to say that you all should be watching his YouTube channel and subscribe there, because he does incredible conversations all the time. You need to watch every single episode of his podcast. It's completely incredible.
What is that Kubrick one right there? Scroll up just a little bit.
AI and Kubrick's Future Dystopia with David Block.
That sounds fun. I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, I did a deep dive on the astrology of Elvis with Miguel too on his
yeah.
That's an interesting narrative. You guys should check that out.
Yeah, that's on my other channel, my personal channel. But yeah, Noah does an incredible job. I mean, oh my God. It's so thorough and just so concise.
But there's a narrative to like the astrology of his life that comes full circle, where after his death, where this book is released, winds up telling this incredible story. Like, blew my mind.
Yeah. Go to live shows. Yeah, go to the live tab, and just you'll see Noah. Keep going down, a little bit more down. Where is it? Oh yeah, Noah Campbell there. Astrology and Elvis, right there. So yeah, you'll be mind blown when you check that one out.
Cool.
Fantastic. That's super awesome. I can't believe I didn't see this already. A video that you've done with Noah right here. Well, everyone loves you both, so I'm sure that we'll get some extra views on this video, and I'll put a link to it in the description, and I'll repost it on X. Miguel, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you very much. I hope that we get to have a conversation in the future.
Thank you very much. I had to do it. But yes, really enjoyed it. Always good talking to Noah, and enjoyed talking to you guys. And hopefully we can do it again.
I'm seeing a blue light.
Thank you.
A blue light.
This is the areas that we were talking about here is like kind of like the optimal stuff that I'd love to. It's thematically the stuff that I love to go into on this podcast. Like, you know, there's a lot of different things that we'll discuss. I like, you know, everyone's talking about politics everywhere, and it's always like kind of the same kind of stuff. And like, it's really refreshing and great to just like talk about the things that we're all fascinated by, and you're just such a wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate you coming on here to chat with us.
Yeah, thanks. The high weirdness is where the magic is, and I think rock music needs to be looked again. I think it's one of the solutions to our problems. Elvis, Bowie, that's where the true magic is. Forget about Selena and all that stuff.
But that great
American magic is with rock music. So, and yeah, check out the Elvis book. I'm done almost with the first draft of the Bowie book, so that would come. I'm glad it's out, because man, both books, the toll it's taken on me is just unbelievable. Again, sometimes forces call on you and you have to listen, but man, they will take their pound of flesh.
Totally.
Well, there was a positive review from The Guardian, so I think you're gonna like this book's gonna break through some of the censorship that we're experiencing. And again, we love.
No, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard because for example, our community, whether it's whatever you want to call it, I don't know what to call it, occult, truth, or whatever we are, has really embraced the book, and I'm glad to see that. But the Elvis fandom, man, they are like, "La, la, 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 la." They
They're
they
not
have their
ready.
own
Yeah.
image of Elvis. Even if you go to Graceland, the first thing the tour guide will say is, "By the way, Elvis was very spiritual." She's warning you. You know, I'm in a group with Australians and Japanese and people from Mississippi, and she's warning you, watch out, because they have a view of Elvis. And if you go through Graceland, you see all the Buddhist motifs. You have his books on the occult that he himself, I mean, it's all there, but they do not. I hope it's one of those that first they ignore you, then they call you crazy. Because the Elvis
Schopenhauer,
fandom, the Elvis fandom is they do not. The Elvis's official fan club gave me a review, and they said it was good, but they were confused because again,
Hey, Sophia is breaking into our reality through Graceland.
yeah, Valis is appearing in Graceland. Right?
Oh shit!
The pink teams are going, and that's the other thing about the book. Yes, but you, Andreas and David, when you read the chapter on how Elvis and Philip K. Dick are the same person, you're not going to be the same. And then in the Bowie book, I take it even further, because without Bowie, Dick would have never written Valis and a lot of his Gnostic expressions, because when he went and saw the man who fell to earth, he was obsessed. He would go over and over, and he thought he would put on Bowie music, and and the man fell to earth is just a retelling of the hymn of the pearl, the Gnostic hymn of the pearl.
Absolutely.
But he was so crazy, he wrote Valis, and of course David Bowie does appear in Valis as one character. So this weird connection of Bowie and William Burroughs and Elvis and all these guys.
I think exogesis I can kind of equate with Jung's Red Book in certain ways. Well, obviously, because you have this very personal thing that so many people can relate to if they go into the depths of it, that I don't think they thought other people would relate to it. Like you brought up Hess earlier, like Steppenwolf is like that too. He's like, other people relate to this, especially young people. It's just baffling to him. And it's like, yeah, because you're touching on things that may feel personal to you, yet they're ultimately shared, so.
Yeah, it is true. And just to give a little spoiler alert, I have again the chapter where Philip K. Dick and Elvis are kind of one and the same, just like Bowie and Elvis are. But when Dick died, his friend went to his apartment and all of his exegesis was scattered across it, because Dick was going crazy, just writing page after page after page. And his friend had two decisions. It was like, well, do I just throw all this junk out? Is this the rambling of a madman, like Jack Torrance in The Shining, So he got it all together, and he's like, where am I going to put it? He saw this giant ashtray, and he put all of Dick's work, the exegesis, on the giant ashtray. What did the ashtray say? Elvis is king. You see that amazing kind of weird connection? So
wow, far out.
Perfect sync. And I think we can all agree these are amazing subjects, and we love rock music, particularly that one song, "Look at Your Game, Girl" by Charles Manson. All right, I had to do it. Thank you very much.
Had to end on that note.
I'm a bad friend. All right, thank you for being here. Everyone, look forward to reading Elvis's book, and then we can't wait for the David Bowie book. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot for being here, Miguel. Peace out.
Thank you.
Thank you.